Hi, it's Nick at Wings and Sim and welcome to what is hopefully the first of our monthly AAIB Bulletin video podcasts where we'll discuss reports of air accidents and significant incidents recently published. First of all, what is the AAIB? The Air Accident Investigation Branch is an independent UK organisation that investigates civil aircraft accidents and serious incidents in the UK, its territories and overseas dependencies. Accident investigations started back in 1912 when the Royal Aero Club published a report into a fatal accident at Brooklands Aerodrome in Surrey, where a Flanders F4 monoplane crashed, killing 2 people. Now, the AAIB employs 64 people and receives between 500 and 700 reports of accidents and incidents every year. Investigations vary in the level of detail depending on the nature of the accident. For example, an incident involving a light aircraft with no fatal or life-threatening injuries to the pilot or passengers may be completed following a brief questionnaire the pilot returns to the AAIB. An accident involving a commercial aircraft will be more involved, for example, the recovery of flight data recorders and further analysis. The AAIB produce 4 types of report. Firstly, a field investigation report, which is a comprehensive report on aircraft accidents usually involving fatal or serious injury. Second is the monthly bulletin, which is what we'll aim to discuss in these videos. The bulletin is a compilation of the most recently completed reports and is published every month on the last Thursday of the month. Don't confuse these with special bulletins, however, which are reports published during an accident or serious investigation to highlight the initial facts and make urgent safety recommendations if required. For example, a recent special bulletin highlighted the dangers of window damage when using powerful lights for filming of aircraft. Lastly, a formal report. These are reports on major AAIB investigations and, as you might expect, cover the most serious accidents and incidents. So, let's make a start and delve into the October 2024 AAIB monthly bulletin. Last month's bulletin included reports of 2 field investigations, 1 correspondence investigation and 21 record-only investigations. Amongst the record-only investigations, there was a student pilot who I feel really sorry for after they veered off the grass during their first solo. A helicopter struck an NDB antenna in Gloucester and an aircraft stalled on landing due to distraction caused by a missing fuel tank selector. That's just a few of the 21 correspondence reports in the bulletin. What I'm going to discuss in depth is one of the field investigations in detail and briefly touch on the second before discussing the correspondence investigation. The first field investigation in the bulletin details an accident at Truro Airfield in Cornwall. Now, unfortunately, the pilot of the van's RV6 didn't survive the accident and the aircraft was destroyed. The accident flight took place in September 2023 and the 60-year-old pilot with 260 hours of experience had decided to fly from White Waltham Airfield, southwest of Maidenhead in Berkshire, to the small grass field strip at Truro in Cornwall. It was supposed to be a 1 hour 50-minute flight, and as far as we are aware, it was uneventful until the approach and landing. The airfield owner witnessed the crash, and he'd had a telephone conversation with the pilot of the aircraft earlier in the day and briefed him on the runways available, the circuit heights and the current winds. He heard the aircraft approaching the field and moved to a balcony to watch the aircraft landing. He reported to the AAIB that the aircraft appeared fast on approach and landed long and off the runway to the right-hand side. The aircraft bounced twice and seemed out of control before its right main wheel contacted the side of a mound as it bounced before landing and rolling over its nose onto its back. The AAIB was able to piece together heading, acceleration and air data of the flight by interrogating an EKP5 moving map system and an IEFIS system which were fitted to the aircraft. Due to the differences in consistency of the acceleration data between the 2 devices, the primary data source used was the EKP5. Also important was the layout of Truro Airfield. Truro is an unlicensed airfield, which means that there is no need for any regulatory oversight. For example, there are no inspections or review of safety standards. However, there is guidance in a document called CAP 793, which sets out recommendations in various aspects of aviation safety, such as runway and taxiway standards and signage. Contrary to these recommendations, on the day of the accident there were large hay bales to the north of the runway, some of which were immediately adjacent to its edge. There's also a mound of earth which had been constructed to facilitate helicopter training, which was on the right hand side of the landing runway. It must be said though that mound was well clear of a 25-metre no obstacle zone suggested in CAP 793. The Van's RV6A is a two-seat amateur-built aircraft. The accident aircraft was built by a previous owner and operated by the pilot since 2015. The previous annual inspection had passed without any problems. A nose strut brace was fitted to the aircraft, which is a popular modification for the RV6A to reduce the risk of nose wheel damage after a heavy landing. It prevents the strut from overbending in the presence of excess forces. Despite the brace being fitted, the nose gear became substantially deformed at the point of landing. The AAIB found evidence that all three wheels are in contact with the ground throughout the duration of the landing run, whereas the manufacturer emphasises that the nose wheel should be held off for as long as possible on the run because of the risk of overloading the nose wheel and risking the aircraft becoming inverted. Now, nose-over events in this type of aircraft have not typically resulted in fatal outcome, and this is because tightly fitted shoulder straps should prevent movement of the pilot towards the canopy and therefore contact with it in case of a rollover event. The canopy was significantly deformed in the accident, but because the pilot had been extricated by first responders, the AAIB wasn't able to assess how tightly the pilot was strapped in. The report does mention, though, anecdotal reports from other pilots that when you are in the left seat of this aircraft, if you're strapped in really tightly, you'll struggle to reach controls on the right-hand side. They don't pass further comment, but perhaps suggesting the pilot might not have been strapped in as tightly as he perhaps should have been. And unfortunately, the cause of death in this case was significant neck injury, which led the AAIB to the conclusion that during the nose-over, the aircraft pilot's head must have come into contact with the canopy. The AAIB looked at their incidents database to look for similar problems with the nose wheel of the Van's aircraft, and there were 30 episodes of nose gear collapse or damage in Van's RV series aircraft in the last 25 years. Vans even have a statement on their website addressing the nose gear of the series of aircraft and that it's undergoing constant redesign and refinement, but emphasising that good piloting technique is essential in preventing issues such as the nose gear damage in this accident. The aircraft landed 20 metres to the right of the grass runway, and the reason for this isn't quite clear. The AAIB discussed various reasons this might have been the case, including the pilot's eyesight causing confusion on approach. The aircraft landed long and fast, and because it didn't actually land on the runway, it landed to the right-hand side. It eventually made contact with the mound that I've mentioned previously. Now, that led to the left wing coming into contact with the ground and probably contributed to the eventual rollover and the sad death of the pilot. The report concludes with 3 safety actions stating that the airfield owner has spoken with the farmers to remove the hay from the airfield as soon as it is baled and not stored there, and the mound of earth has subsequently been removed. I do wonder though if perhaps the AAIB might have asked for a response from Van's aircraft. 30 incidents relating to the nose gear in 25 years in this country alone seems significant to me. Another example of a similar incident was in June 2023 when the Australian equivalent of the AAIB, the ATSB, urged owners of Van's RV6, 7 and 9 model aircraft to consider retrofitting a stronger nose gear system after a number of nose-over accidents in Australia. In an incident that sounds eerily similar to the one we've just been discussing, in January 2023, a Van's RV-9A aircraft encountered a tailwind whilst landing on a private grass airstrip in Australia, resulting in a hard landing which was captured on video. It nosed over and came to a rest inverted, resulting in serious injuries to both occupants. As you've just seen there from the video, the aircraft landed reasonably flat, bounced, causing significant distress to the nose gear, leading it to collapse and the aircraft to roll over. Given the rate of nose wheel incidents in this series of aircraft, is it just a matter of time until we have another fatal accident which is contributed to by the problems with the van's nose gear? The second field investigation concerns a crash of a UAS Malloy Aeronautics D-150 drone, it's a bit of a mouthful, in a field whilst on a training flight. Control of the drone was lost when it exited its geofence. This caused the drone to revert to an automatic mode and return to its point of departure. The pilot of the drone took it out of the automatic mode, which caused the drone to enter an unusual flight path which wasn't helped by some erratic throttle inputs. The drone struck the ground and was destroyed. The AAIB's conclusion was that there was a lack of training and normalisation of taking the drone out of its automatic return to base mode, which led to the crash. It made a safety recommendation to the Civil Aviation Authority that it should define well any safety features designed to mitigate risk when developing operational procedures for new and emerging aircraft. Finally, the correspondence report in the Bulletin concerns probably Britain's most loved and certainly most famous aircraft, the Spitfire. Golf Lima Foxtrot Indigo X-Ray is a Mark 9 training Spitfire, which is a two-seater model, built in 1944 and is operated by a company at Sywell aerodrome in Northamptonshire, providing Spitfire experience flights. The Spitfire was on its third flight of the day, and the very experienced pilot with over 20,000 hours of flight experience was flying a friend. As part of the aircraft's restoration, its fuel system had been modified, with the small 13-gallon wing tanks being replaced with larger 60-gallon tanks. Spitfires also have a fuselage fuel tank which was retained in this modification. As well as changing the tanks, the fuel system was reconfigured to supply fuel to the engine from either the fuselage tank via an electric pump or to gravity feed the fuel from both wing tanks. The wing tanks don't have a quantity gauge, however the fuselage tank does, and the quantity of fuel in the fuselage tank is displayed on a gauge whenever a button is pressed on the instrument panel. The reason it's not permanent like in other small aircraft and in your car, for example, is that it would eventually cause the elements in the sensors to fail if it was constantly displayed. The operator's procedures are to take off and land using the fuselage tank, because the gravity-fed wing tanks are less reliable during ground manoeuvring. There's also redundancy from the electric fuel pump I've already mentioned. Once away from the airfield, the wing tanks are selected as the main fuel source. The pilot considered that on the first flight of the day he had neglected to switch to the wing tanks after takeoff. On the third and final flight of the day, which was the incident flight, he became interrupted during a checklist and didn't check the contents of the fuselage tank as per that checklist. This flight was operating completely normally until the approach, when the pilot switched from the wing tanks to the fuselage tank as per normal procedure. After around 30 seconds, the engine surged and shut down. The pilot attempted to switch back to the wing tanks and yawed the aircraft from side to side to try and encourage fuel into the engine, but an airlock had formed which could not be overcome by the fuel gravity feed. The aircraft was at 2,000 feet at this point, and the pilot realised he didn't have sufficient height to land back at Sywell and elected to land at Pitsford, which is a small grass strip around 2.5 nautical miles to the west of Sywell. Pitsford is a small grass strip, and the fast approach speed of a Spitfire meant that the field boundary rapidly approached after landing, and the pilot turned to avoid a hedge. This caused a landing gear to dig into the ground, pitching the Spitfire onto its nose and left wing. Luckily, the pilot and passenger were uninjured. The operator has since changed its procedures, mandating that the contents of a fuselage tank are checked prior to the tank being switched to. So that's my short roundup of the October 2024 AAIB Bulletin. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, drop me a like and subscribe to the channel for more interesting aviation content. Bye for now.